Okay, this is the tussock milkweed moth. First time I could get this thing in focus after trying for a few minutes. Very cool caterpillar. Large milkweed bug on swamp milkweed. And these are the seed pods here, which is what I'm collecting, so I can plant more of this. So this is swamp milkweed, and you got all these seed pods starting. And that orange bug is a large milkweed bug. I don't know what the tiny ones are. So this is the swamp milkweed. I had to switch cameras. I'm using my phone for this so you can see this better. But I was showing you the orange here. These are all these different aphids. But on this one, look at these monarch caterpillars. Give me a second while this focuses. This is a monarch caterpillar. There are a few on here. There's another one. Sorry, it's hard to focus on these. So this is along a roadside. A bunch of goldenrod with tons of milkweed. See in here. Here you see the seed pods. And there's hundreds of milkweed plants through here. I'm off the road plenty, but I've been collecting a good bit of pods. There's a lot in here. And you can see right on this one, a bunch of the large milkweed bugs. Yeah, these are the ones that look just ready. I collected some early in the year and they just weren't ready, I think. But yeah, just as they're turning gray, they're getting really ready to pop open on their own. So I'm cutting them and I'll be, oh, actually here you can see it. One that's already opened. You see the milkweed bugs. You see the fluff inside of it. Silky, I don't know what exactly you call it, but yeah, pretty cool. So that one's going to be dispersed on its own. I believe this big thing is swamp aster. I've seen this the last couple of days, been needing to stop and get down here. You can see it's growing in water. And there's a few more along that drain over here. Right here you have Isabella tiger moth caterpillar. And then again, behind the goldenrod there, you can see there's more milkweed. That's opened up on its own. Those seeds will all disperse, and as long as there's no disturbance, there should be even a lot more milkweed next year. Welcome back to Tied Up with the Morgans. As you can tell, I'm at my parents'. I'm here with Hunter and Eva. My parents are out of town right now, and today I wanted to talk to you about what I was doing in the beginning of this video, where I was collecting milkweed pods. I wanted to go over milkweed, why it's important, why I'm collecting them, how you can do it, and why you should do it. So we're going to go over that today. And it's common milkweed. The scientific name is Asclepias syriaca, which means in Latin milkweed, hence the name. And that name comes from the milky like sap inside of the plant. If you've ever seen milkweed, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It has like a milky substance kinda, and it's kind of sticky feeling. That it looks similar to milk. That's why it's called milkweed. So let's go over those things, why it's important, why I like it, you know, the benefits, and why I'm collecting milkweed seed pods, and why you should too. Or if you're not going to collect them, why you should be more aware of it. So let's get into that. Asclepias, meaning milkweed, is the genus name. And that's, in the US alone, there are over 76 different species of milkweed. I haven't found 76 different species. I've found, I would say, less than 10. But that's okay, because the ones I've found are very cool, and if you live east of the Rockies, there's a good chance you have milkweed near you too. I mentioned if you live east of the Rockies, then you're probably close to milkweed. The exception to that is Montana. Montana has milkweed as well, and it appears some parts of Oregon too. However, the states, it doesn't necessarily mean that every state east of the Rockies is filled with common milkweed, because native range isn't necessarily by state. And I've mentioned this before, but a native plant doesn't mean it's native to the whole state. An example of this that I think of, at least a good example that helps me understand that more, because that might be confusing to some people. Like, say if one plant's native to the county I live in, why wouldn't it be native to the next county? And that's for a number of reasons. I mean, first off, it just has a native range that it's been in for, thousands of years, these plants. But one way to think of it too is the changing climate. For example, where we live in Pennsylvania, let me come to a stop in case you can't hear me. For example, where we live in Pennsylvania, the climate is fairly the same. However, if you go an hour north of here, or even 30 minutes north of here, they get much more snow, and that's because they're that much closer to Lake Erie. Where my parents bought the property in West Virginia, Terra Alta, that receives more snow than anywhere in West Virginia, and that's due to its elevation. I think of living out west in Utah, even Colorado. I lived there as well. I lived in both those places for 3 years, and in Colorado, or I should say in Utah, there's going to be plenty of plants that grow in southern Utah, in the Moab area, St. George area, that do not grow in the Wasatch Mountains, in the Salt Lake area, because the climate is totally different. So just because it's native to one part of the state does not mean it's native to the whole state. So that's a little bit of background as to why you might not have common milkweed where you live, even if you're east of the Rockies. And that's because some of the more drier parts of those states, I guess in the Midwest, some states can be pretty dry, you're probably not going to find common milkweed. You might find another variation, but you might not find common. So keep that in mind. Whenever I say it's east of the Rockies, I will also include a picture of its native range right now. So in this picture, you'll see here that it has kind of east of the Rockies, but you can see those little dots. The dark green means that it's native to the state. The light green means it's native to the county. So you see it's not necessarily filling the whole state, but parts of the state. So milkweed, it's a perennial forb that can grow about 3 to 5 feet tall. And it can, if it's allowed to, meaning it's not mowed or anything, it can be almost aggressive, but it's a good thing because you want milkweed. Why I say it can be aggressive is because it spreads through rhizomes, so it can spread really fast. So I mentioned that it spreads through rhizomes and can almost be aggressive, but it usually isn't because it's often mowed, or people will weed whack it or just get rid of it without knowing what it is. And in this area is a whole bunch of milkweed. And this was where my dad was working on the driveway. This is my aunt's driveway he was working on. And I told him not to use this area as a dump pile because of all the milkweed and scarlet bee balm. So you can see more milkweed over here. The leaves grow from 4 to 11 inches. They have almost kind of a velvet underside. I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of like a velvet on the underside. And you'll see in this area was definitely disturbed, and this is where he cleared this all out, but you already have a whole bunch of it spreading, showing that it can grow pretty quickly. And it's actually kind of a good thing that this happens, because what happens about from like June till August is kind of like peak reproduction time for the monarch butterflies. And so what they'll do is they'll lay their eggs on these new ones as they're coming up. So like the big ones will kind of die off, look like this earlier in the year, and then they'll get mowed or weed eat or whatever, and then the eggs will get laid on these when they're pretty small. Like this one, for example, is like a foot tall, and so eggs will get laid on there, and then whenever they're caterpillars, they'll like these leaves much better than they would like these kind of leaves. So that's a really important thing. It grow that because it has those rhizomes, it spreads that way. It can grow fast later in the season, and so it'll grow, giving the new caterpillars good soft leaves that they like to eat. But we're going to go more into monarchs in a minute. I just wanted to highlight these small ones and why they are important. It can grow in a number of areas. It does prefer sunlight though, so you're not going to find it in full shade or anything like that. But it's cool. There's some butterflies over there right now. But anyways, it prefers moist to well-drained areas. It can do dry soils as well. It actually can kind of thrive in a number of different soil types. Oftentimes you'll find it along roadsides or along fence posts or medians or things like that, where they might not be mowing. But I'd say it's one of its biggest threats is mowing, and that's why you're not going to necessarily find it in a lot of fields, because it's mowed. But I've found it along fields quite a bit along the fence line. So if next time you're driving and you see, you know of a field, or maybe you have your own field, check around this fence post where, it doesn't get weed whacked or anything like that, and there's a good chance you'll find milkweed there. When it's in flower, it's very fragrant. It has a strong scent, and I love the flowers of common milkweed, of all milkweed really, but it's really cool. And I actually have some video of this milkweed here when it was in flower, and so I can include that, and you'll see there's butterflies and everything. I'd say they can even grow taller than 5 feet, because I'm 5'10", and this one is taller than me, so I'd say they can get to be about 6 feet tall. And here's a seed pod here. This one's probably ready to get picked. This one, not yet. Light green. You want to get them as they're kind of like a goldish brown gray almost. That's when they're ready. And you can see these leaves. It's kind of getting to the end of the season here. Leaves get nice and big. They're opposite leaves, not alternate. They get pretty big, like I mentioned. And yeah, so these go into flower about midsummer, and then the seed pods develop after that. So there were some really big flowers on here that were nice and beautiful, and I already showed you that video. And now you got these seed pods that develop that are full of a lot of seeds. And we'll go more into that in a minute. So this is along that driveway that my dad redid, but right on the other side of here is a creek, and that's where these can kind of thrive. Like I mentioned, roadsides, places like that. Near our house, where Kate and I live, we have a bunch of swamp milkweed, and it went to seed about a month ago, and I collected a lot of those. So it's pretty much done for this season, but all throughout here is milkweed. And you see, if allowed, it can spread a lot, but oftentimes it's mowed, and that prevents it from spreading like this. But yeah, in its peak, especially when there's flowers, this place is just full of so many kinds of insects. And we're going to go into that in a little more detail. But I actually got to head back to the house, so we're not going to be by this milkweed anymore. Eve is leaving, so I'm going to run and hang out with Hunter, but I will go into a little more detail on why this is important. So I'm back to the house, and I wanted to go over a little bit why common milkweed, and milkweed in general, but today we're talking about common milkweed, why it's so important. And that is because it is a plant that over 450 insects feed on, from caterpillars, butterflies, bees, wasps, ants, beetles, yeah, any insect. Over 450 species feed on common milkweed, and all of those play an important role in the food chain, right? So some of them may be eating each other. I mean, they're all eating that milkweed. The pollinators need it. It's a very important pollinator. Like I said, it's a very highly fragrant flower, which goes into flower, I think, like midsummer, I'd say, like, or even early summer, like June to July. I think you'll see it sometimes in August. Yeah, so probably summer months it's in flower, so it's a very important pollinator, but not just for pollinators, but for any of those. Like I said, over 450 species of beetles, ants, wasps, all of them rely on that milkweed, but a few in particular are dependent on that milkweed. So those beetles, those other things I listed, right, they may not necessarily need it. They'll find other plants that they can feed on, but some are not so lucky, and that's the monarchs. The monarch, its host plant is milkweed. Milkweed's the host plant for monarch, butterflies, caterpillars. And it's also the main plant for the large milkweed bug, or the known as the red milkweed beetle, and also the milkweed tussock moth. I have a video of both of those things. I have some videos I'll include here in a second of the, actually, so where Kate and I live, I mentioned we have some swamp milkweed, and that's where there was hundreds of milkweed beetles, large milkweed bugs, red milkweed beetle, and that was taken, that footage was from July, like July 23rd, I believe, is when it was taken. So we'll include that. And then the other video I'll include is of the milkweed tussock moth, which was taken on August 17th. And this was at the property in Terra Alta, my parents' property in West Virginia. They have poke milkweed there. And it's running along, sure enough, I mentioned this, running along the old fence posts. Again, along fence posts. Nothing's being, I mean, my dad is mowing things now, but it's kind of different with it being a much more developed forest. That pokeweed seems to do all right in the shade. So anyways, there I found the milkweed tussock moth, which is pretty cool. And it was still just the caterpillar. Large milkweed bug on swamp milkweed. And these are the seed pods here, which is what I'm collecting, so I can plant more of this. Okay, this is the tussock milkweed moth. First time I could get this thing in focus after trying for a few minutes. Very cool caterpillar. So I thought that video was pretty cool. Both those videos of the milkweed tussock moth, which is dependent on that, just like the monarchs are dependent on that. In some of those videos too, you saw some monarch caterpillars on the swamp milkweed by our house. But this is, again, today's video is all about common milkweed, but it's very similar to all types of milkweed, where it's all of them are still a host plant for those monarchs and those other insects that I talked about. But I mentioned this when we were down along my cousin's driveway looking at the milkweed, that they lay their eggs on the bottom of the leaves, and then when they become a caterpillar, they feed on that plant. And so I think that's really cool. Sorry for that. I have a board here in front of me, and when I put my hands down, the camera lifts up. So sorry, I'll be better about that. So the monarch populations have been declining quite a bit, and this is where milkweed is important. It is the only plant that monarchs will eat, and part of that is because there's a toxin that they get from that they are immune to, but other predators will stay away from the monarchs because of that. Because of that toxin, they don't mess with the monarch caterpillars, butterflies. So that's pretty cool that they're immune to this toxin that's in milkweed, and they get that from eating it, and so it protects them. It's a defense against other predators. So that's one cool fact. But also, I mentioned that the populations are declining, And there's a number of reasons for that. I would say that the first one is due to development. And that's kind of, the cause of everything, it seems like, at least in our area. The town close to us, it's called Cranberry. My dad's mentioned it before. I remember when I was a kid, how many farms there were there. And I hear stories from my parents, or even their parents, my grandparents, about how there was like nothing. Cranberry was just all farms. And I've seen old pictures, and it's amazing how much it's changed. And it's a bummer to me, but there's nothing I can do about development. People need places to live. That's not what this video is about. It's not to bash developers or anything like that. Everyone has a living to make. I get that. So development, I guess, is part of life. I don't really know how you prevent that from happening, right? But it's a bummer to see, at least to me, it's a bummer to see whether it's a nice wooded forest or, it's a nice farm. It's a bummer to see it all going away. Where we live, I should say. It's not like that everywhere, You head up north, it's totally different. You head down to the property, totally different. So, I mean, there's plenty of places out there. But that is a huge reason for the monarchs declining, is development. Another is mowing. And not necessarily mowing in your yards that is doing that, because we don't really have... It depends on your lawn. I know our lawn, we have lots of weeds, and I would think that we wouldn't have milkweed there, but you never know. And I have a little story about that. We have a lot of yard and a lot of mowing and a lot of weed eating to do, especially the weed eating, weed whacking, whatever you call it, string trimming. And along our driveway, my dad redid that a few years ago, and he brought in a whole bunch of fill. And there's probably like a 6 foot, no, because you can hit it, I would say it's about 10 feet wide of grass on one side of the driveway that I can mow. The rest, it's really steep and you can't get the mower on there. So I would always weed whack that, weed eat it. And this year I'd actually let it go just to grow up and kind of see what was there. This is when I was really getting into native plants, learning more about the seed bank, native seed bank, and I let it go. And as a result, I actually have milkweed coming up, which is crazy. I never would have expected that. So that alone is an example to me that mowing is a big part of the decline of milkweed. And I saw it firsthand on our own property. But like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean you have it in your yard. That's not even in our yard. It's kind of along a stream. So that, again, makes sense, as that's one of the places that you'll find milkweed often. The other place you'll find it is along roadways, and that seems to be a big cause. Like I mentioned, the development seems to be the #1 cause, but there's really not much we can do about that. What seems to be a huge factor is mowing, and especially along roadways. In our area, they don't spray. I've heard in some places they spray. Fortunately, they don't do that here. Spray herbicides along the roads, but they mow, and I've never understood it. Why? Maybe there's a reason. If it's something to do with, like, maybe it's harder to see deer coming out of the woods, I think that's silly, because the deer are going to get a hit regardless. They're going to come through just as fast. So I don't know if it's to help you see what's on the side of the road so you don't hit anything. I'm not sure. That's the only thing that I could come up with, and I don't think it's a good excuse. So I don't get the point in mowing along roadways. For the township to go and do that. They get these big, I think it's called a flail mower, or like a brush hog almost, but it's like an attachment on a tractor that sticks off, and they mow these sides of the roads. I don't get it. Yeah, but that's a huge reason for the decline in milkweed, is mowing there, because that milkweed thrives there. Another thing is just mowing in fields, like I said. Near my parents' property, there's a field we did a video on. I was showing before, in that field there was a whole bunch of turkeys, and that was a sign of a good habitat. But also you could see in that field lots of milkweed. So mowing, I think, is a big part of it, and spraying in some places. Like I said, that's not a problem here, but it is a problem in other places where they'll spray along roadways. So if it were up to me, I wouldn't be mowing along those roadways. There's like steep banks and things that they mow, because there's a lot of beneficial plants that grow there. And if you are concerned about invasive plants, which you should be, if you have invasives growing along the roadway, mowing it is only going to spread it everywhere that mower is going, right? So I mean, if he's going through and he's mowing multiflora rose, or if he's mowing stiltgrass or autumn olive, privet, any of those, all he's doing is just spreading that along the roadways. So if this one guy has a tractor that maybe he does a 2-mile stretch and he's mowing invasives, he's just spreading that throughout that whole place, and that's how it's getting on other properties. So sorry for that rant. It makes no sense to me why we're mowing along roadways. Oh, and also medians. That's another one. In Pennsylvania, it drives me nuts. If you're kind of in the middle of nowhere on a highway and there's nothing, there's just woods on each side, you know, it's beautiful. In the middle, they're constantly mowing that, keeping it short. I don't get it. West Virginia, I've seen a lot of West Virginia have wildflowers in the middle of those medians, and it looks so much nicer. They let it grow up and it's beautiful, and I like that a lot better than just mowing it. And yeah, so I think that's a lot of wasted opportunity there, that we don't let that grow up, because, you know, we're not going to get the milkweed and the monarch population back to what it once was, I don't think, not with the amount of development. But I think by changing our mowing and spraying habits would make a big impact, and I think it would look more beautiful. I think there's nothing cooler than driving along the road, seeing countless butterflies and pollinators, cool flowers. So I don't understand why we're mowing all of that when we're not playing baseball in the middle of the median, you know, where there's not a soccer game going on. It's just there. And then if you also want to look at it, the money that goes into maintaining that, if we just let that be native and leave it alone, it wouldn't need us to intervene, and it would cost us, you know, less money. So I don't know. I don't know how they spend our tax dollars anyways. We're not getting into that today, but I don't see the need for any of that.